Here is another problem that comes out. A lot of Muslims historically have always had this problem with sonship. Jesus as the Son of God. And you can see why. And this has always been one of the first questions that we do get from lots of Muslims. And understandably so. Because when they hear sonship, they're thinking biological sonship. And the problem is, really, this book right here. The Qur'an assumes biological sonship. Let me give you some example. Well, chapter 4, verse 171. Surah 4, ayah 171. Say not three, for God is one, and he has no son. God has no son. There it's very clear that God has no son. What does it mean by son? Well, start with chapter 5. Chapter 5 has a whole list of what that means and backs it up. Chapter 5 of the Quran says in verse 17 that Allah is, say not that Allah is a Messiah, the son of Mary. So Allah cannot be the son of Mary. So it introduces the idea of a woman as the mother. That's why sonship cannot be, because Allah cannot come from a woman. Chapter 5 verse 72 says that Allah has no partner. So therefore there's another idea of Allah having a physical partner, that Jesus would be the partner of God. 3 verses later in chapter 5 verse 75 that Allah cannot eat. So this son would Isa did eat, therefore since Isa ate and also Mary ate, that Isa cannot be the son because Allah doesn't eat. And then we get chapter 5 verse 116, which is really clear, because there it's very clear that Allah turns to Isa and says to him, is it true that you and your mother are to be worshipped as God? Assuming therefore that Mary is part of the Trinity. So you have Allah the Father, Mary the Mother, and Jesus the Son. Very much of a biological relationship. You can see that right there. And that's the seemingly the Quranic view of the Trinity. And then you get Surah 6, ayah 101. Allah has no consort, has no wife. Again, imposing this view that sonship has to imply a biological relationship, that it must be a man impregnated a woman, from that comes the son, and that's why Isa would have to be that son. Well, of course, Isa is the son of Mary, but the understanding is God has no progeny, no biological progeny, and that's why it's very important why it attacks this idea. Now, when you go through and you ask very simply, can a son be uniquely biological? Are there other sons that are not biological? Ibn al-Sibili, let's look at that. In chapter 2, verse 177 of the Quran, a traveler, someone who's going from one place to the other, is Ibn al-Sibili, son of the road. Does that assume, therefore, that the traveler is born, has a biological relationship with the road? No, absolutely not. So even in the Quran, in the Arabic, it assumes that Ibn can mean something other than biological. There's an example of it. What's more, in chapter 39, verse 4, it even intimates that Allah could have a son. Very clear. For Allah, if he so had willed it, he could have a son. So even this idea of Allah having a son is intimated in the Quran, which seems to jump against the idea that Allah may not have had a son. I mean, that's certainly true. The Quran is very clear on that. But again, it does intimate there that's a possibility. And then we ask the question. So what is sonship? Well, it's fascinating because in Arabic, the name Wahid is the biological name for son. Wahid is biological son. Ibn can be more than a biological understanding. It can be one of inheritance. And there are quite a few examples of men who have had progeny, who inherit their wealth and inherit their all their riches, but they are not the biological son, but they're still seen as son of God. There are many people who are watching this video who talk about, oh, he's my father, this is my son, but they have no relationship whatsoever. It's inherited. They inherit an idea of sonship. And this is quite normal in the Middle East. It's also quite normal in other parts of the world. So why are Muslims so hung up on this? Well, the big reason is because the Quran's hung up on it. And if you want to blame anybody for the problem of sonship, don't blame the Bible and don't blame Jesus Christ and don't blame the Christians. Blame this book right here. It has a problem with sonship. Because it knows that if Jesus inherits everything the Father inherits. That means he inherits his divinity, which means Jesus, being the Son of God, inherits his divinity. It is a divine title. It's a divine, So when every time that Jesus, and all the way through the New Testament, he does claim to be the Son of God, and every time he claims to be the Son of God, he is basically saying, I am God. I am God. I am God. That's why the Qur'an doesn't like it. And that's why Muslims attack it. Really, it comes down to, they just don't want to accept that Jesus is God. Come on home to the real Jesus, who is the Son of God, has always been the Son of God, will never stop being the Son of God, eternally is the Son of God. That's the God we offer to you. This is Jathan, over and out.